Hello, Kuma229 here with the final part of my Rush Hour Trilogy retrospective review, of course ending on Rush Hour 3. Rush Hour 3 is a 2007 sequel to Rush Hour 2, so how does it stack up against its predecessors in the show? Let's take a look at the plot. Okay, I probably should have been doing this before, but spoiler warning. Spoilers for Rush Hour 1, Rush Hour 2, Rush Hour 3, and the Rush Hour show. Oops. Now, the plot of Rush Hour 3 can basically be described as triads in France. Basically, the plot kicks off when Ambassador Han, Counselor Han, from the first movie, he's back for a little bit, is almost killed in an attempted assassination. Don't worry, he's okay. He almost dies. So to solve the conspiracy behind the people who were trying to assassinate him, Lee and Carter follow the breadcrumbs all the way to Paris, and then fight bad guys and stuff. That's basically the gist of the plot. Also, we have Kenji, Lee's brother. Well, foster brother. They grew up in an orphanage together. The plot is... it's actually pretty darn good, in all honesty. You know, looking back, I actually like it more than I did when I saw it when it first came out. You know, I appreciate the plot a little bit more. The problem with it is it gets bogged down with a few parts, and I'll talk about each of those things as I get to them. But despite getting bogged down with stuff, it does have a few things that basically elevate this above being just a mediocre movie. One of those things is Kenji, the main bad guy of the movie. Kenji is Lee's brother, or, well, a foster brother. He is hands down the most interesting character in the movie. Hands down. Honestly, I'm shocked. Kenji is the kind of character that you would honestly get annoyed at. Oh, your brother who's evil comes out of nowhere. Like, really? Like, it sounds so cliche, but it works. Now, what's funny about this is that I don't know if this was a change in Lee's backstory or if this was something that they had intended for a while, but the whole thing with Lee being adopted is actually new. Funnily enough, if you want to compare this to something in the show, Carter is the one who's actually lived in an orphanage, and that's where he met Gerald. Or I think that's what it was. I'm pretty sure that they're not actually related. But, whatever. With Kenji, oh my gosh, I'll have to talk about this a little more later, but the relationship with Kenji between Lee is so interesting. While there is another main villain in the movie, Renard, Kenji is clearly the main bad guy. Like all the other Rush Hour movies, there's always an evil white guy and evil Asian guy. Rush Hour 1, evil white guy, evil Asian guy. Rush Hour 2, evil white guy, evil Asian guy. Rush Hour 3, evil white guy, evil Asian guy. In the first movie, you had... and you also had Sang. In Rush Hour 2, you had that billionaire guy and then Ricky Tan. In Rush Hour 3, you have Renard and Kenji. Now, where they mix things up, though, is who's actually the main villain. In Rush Hour 1, it was Juntao. And then in Rush Hour 2, it was Ricky Tan. And in Rush Hour 3, it's really Kenji. You can actually tell who the main villain of a Rush Hour movie is by seeing who plummets to their death at the end of the movie. Seriously, it happens in every single movie. The other one just gets shot or stabbed. But Kenji steals the limelight here. And Renard is played by Max von Sydow. So that's kind of impressive. The guy who plays him, Hiroyuki Sanada, he does a good job playing him. Now I'll get more into why I really love Kenji a little bit more in detail when I get to the end when I talk about the characters. Now, one thing I need to talk about is something that I really only discovered pretty much yesterday. The deleted scenes. Every movie has cut content, whether it's to meet a specific time frame, or if it doesn't work, or if the plans change. Sometimes this is a good decision, sometimes it's bad, and sometimes things don't make as much sense. Like with Star Wars, A New Hope, when they cut out all of Biggs' scenes except for the end. So when we see Biggs, we don't know that he's Luke's best friend. So when he dies, we don't really get that impact. And there's some stuff with Rush Hour 3 that happens, and it's actually kind of annoying. There are some scenes that I understand why they were cut. Some of them weren't even meant to be in the movie. They were just kind of, I know one of them was actually meant to be a commercial. And there's one that's during the breakup, the breakup part, and it happens before that, but it's too overly comedic, and it kind of breaks the tension between them, between Lee and Carter. And there's this one scene that involves showing how Lee got to the lights in the dancing club to interrupt Genevieve's show. And, some of those just kind of broke pacing. They would have bogged things down. And even though they were funny, it was better that they were cut. But there are a couple scenes that I am absolutely baffled that they cut. One of them is a scene where Lee goes into detail about his adoption. Carter straight up asks him, "Wait, you're adopted? I thought your dad was a cop." And then he says, "My dad adopted me when I was 10. And then of course in the next scene he goes into more detail about actually the orphanage and Kenji. The scene was cut supposedly because of some messed up thing on the set, which is ridiculous. I mean, okay, here's that scene.
If he's not your brother, then who is he? Who is he, Lee? And what's that language y'all was speaking?
Kenji is Japanese. We met in Shenzhen. It's an orphanage outside Beijing. It's where I grew up.
You was in an orphanage? I thought you said your father was a cop.
He was. They adopted me when I was 10. I was one of the lucky ones.
Lucky? Can't believe nothing you say. This is great. I'm marked for death, and your ass is a lying orphan. I knew we should have went to Fiji. I knew it. Oh, you just gonna let the door close on me like that?
I don't get why this was caught. This is actually something that I've been wondering about. I mean, wait a minute. When was he adopted? Did that happen when his father died? And I'm like, wait a minute. Didn't Rush Hour 2 establish that his dad died 5 years ago? I went back and rewatched it, and yeah, it does.
Carter, Ricky Tan set up my father.
What?
Five years ago, my father was working a big international smuggling case. He found out his partner Tan was working for the trials. But before he could prove it, he was killed. All the evidence disappeared. Tan resigned, and the case was never solved.
So I get it now. This is all about your daddy's last case.
So I'm like, wait a minute, what is it? Like, I'm a little lost on the timeline here. This scene explains it. It explains that he was adopted. His father that died adopted him. Okay, that clears a lot of stuff up, because that's not clear in the movie. We know he's adopted, but that's not made. That kind of element's not made clear. What bugs me about this so darn much that this is like cutting out that scene in Rush Hour 2 when Lee is explaining, the history between his father and Ricky Tan and to Carter, and he's talking about his father's last case, and that gives us context for knowing what happened and when this went down. Like sure, it's talked about in other scenes, but these specific details are only talked about in that scene. And it's a shame that scene got lost. On top of that actually gives a lot more context to Lee and Carter's breakup. Because when you actually watch the movie, in the final cut of the movie, and you see that scene, I have a few criticisms of that whole section of the movie anyway, but one of the issues with it is that it just doesn't feel like there's any real reason for this breakup to happen. In Rush Hour 1 or Rush Hour 2, it makes sense. Like, they really haven't known each other all that long by the time of Rush Hour 2. So when they had that, falling out, that makes some sense. And this time, it's been several years. So even if there is some issues between them, having Lee go so far as to declare Carter is not my brother, well, it seems like it's going a little far. But in this deleted scene, Carter actually acts kind of like a dick, calling him a lying orphan. Okay, yeah, that actually makes more sense why he would be pissed off at him. I mean, that whole section of the movie it doesn't make a lot of sense. And the worst part about it is that it's pretty much just a retread of the same scene in Rush Hour 2, except without the whole thing of Lee thinking that Carter died. And in fact, they just come back, they just meet each other up when they're looking for Genevieve, and then, alright, cool, we're cool now. It's like, it's one of the only parts in the movie that really doesn't make a lot of sense. And yes, we got some funny parts of, Lee, watching like shows about Africa, eating fried chicken, and then you have Carter eating Chinese food, and he's watching a part of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom with Short Round. And then you see he's watching a street performer sing, "I wish we all could be California girls," in French. So he's mispronouncing stuff. But it's like, which is the song that him and Lee were singing at the beginning of Rush Hour 2. And these are funny, but the resolution is immediate. And overall, that whole thing just felt like it was repeating what was already done in Rush Hour 2. It's one of the few times that really just bugs me in this movie. Because the movie doesn't repeat a lot of stuff. Okay, well, it does repeat some stuff, but it doesn't repeat too much stuff. And this is one of those things where it's just a big, hey, it's almost like they were trying to pad the movie out. Okay. But besides that, there's one deleted scene in this that I do not understand why it was cut. Apparently the director didn't like it. It's an alternate ending. It's an alternate ending that, given the context of the scene, I suppose would happen after the actual ending of the movie that we saw, where, they punched the French guy. They saved Genevieve and they punched the French guy. Here, I'll give you that scene. It's about a minute and a half. This is the whole scene.
That plane looks familiar.
Ambassador Han sent it his way of thanking me. He left the hospital with Su Yang last night.
Then I guess George was right. Case closed.
Carter, we might not see each other for a long time.
Hey, even if we're on opposite sides of the planet, we'll always be partners.
Not partners. Brothers.
Shangdi,
Word.
take care, Lee.
It's been fun, Carter. Yeah. Oh, Carter, I just thought of something. Han sent this plane, but I don't know where I'm going.
Thought you was going home.
Why going home? When I could go to Fiji.
Fiji?
Gentlemen, are you ready to go?
The mushu is getting cold.
Come on, Lee. Let's eat. Isabella! Hey, baby!
Yeah, Isabella's back. I mean, this makes things make a lot more sense. I didn't know why Isabella kept being brought up throughout the movie. If nothing happened between Lee and her, fine. I mean, it was only implied that, they could get together, especially since they were going to New York, where she was also going. They could get together, they could not. The movie establishes that, yes, they did get together. They were about to sleep together, and then Carter interrupted it by accidentally shooting her, which is brought up multiple times throughout the movie. I mean, early on in the movie, Lee's actually holding a picture of Isabella. Like, he really cares about her. So, I mean, I'm wondering, why was she brought up so much if nothing was ever going to happen? And then, it makes sense if she's going to come back at the end, and she and Lee get back together, Genevieve and Carter get back together, and you've completed the trilogy. You've ended it. You've wrapped this up. And I mean, it was great to see Genevieve and Carter, because honestly, you can tell that Genevieve and Carter actually do really like each other, and that was nice to see. And then one, Another thing is that it's thematically fitting to end the Rush Hour movie on. Rush Hour 1 and Rush Hour 2 both end in the airport. And this ends at an airport too. And then both Rush Hour 1 and Rush Hour 2 end with Lee and Carter talking about going someplace. And they're getting on an airplane to go someplace. In Rush Hour 1, it was Hong Kong. In Rush Hour 2, it was New York. And in Rush Hour 3, it's them in this deleted scene, they're talking about going to Fiji, just chill out on a vacation. And it's great. And what I don't understand is that this could easily be added to the end of the actual movie. Just do a little bit of editing. It's a little rough, but this is basically how I would envision that would go.
Put the gun down.
I followed you.
Case closed.
Good job, man. Hey, man. You touch me again, you gonna owe me dinner and a movie.
Congratulations, it appears we have finally brought down the trials.
We?
You didn't do shit.
My butt still hurts.
The Americans and the French need to work together in a spirit of brotherhood. Together we can do anything. Anything.
He's right, Lee. Together, we can do anything. You go this way.
And I'll go that way.
That plane looks familiar.
Ambassador Han sent it his way of thanking you. He left the hospital with Su Yang last night.
Then I guess George was right. Case closed.
Carter, we might not see each other for a long time.
Hey, even if we're on opposite sides of the planet, we'll always be partners.
Not partners. Brothers.
Shangdi,
Word.
take care, Lee.
It's been fun, Carter. Yeah. Oh, Carter, I just thought of something. Han sent this plan, but I don't know where I'm going.
Thought you was going home.
Why going home? When I could go to Fiji.
Fiji?
Gentlemen, are you ready to go?
The Mushu is getting cold.
Come on, Lee. Let's eat. Isabella! Hey, baby.
Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again, y'all.
I mean, you can have one heck of a director's cut. And with this, I mean, add some of these scenes back, take some of the more useless scenes. But honestly, I actually like this movie a lot more having seen the deleted scenes. And it just baffles me why they were removed. Now, as far as the humor goes, the humor in this movie is sadly kind of hit or miss. I mean, I laughed more in it than I did in Rush Hour 1, but simply for the fact that there's more attempts at comedy in this. In Rush Hour 1, like I said in my review, didn't try to be very comedic all the time. You could actually tell the approach that this movie takes with its comedy in terms of its plot and its action just from looking at the beginning. Because the beginning of this movie actually opens up with Carter directing traffic. And then, of course, a car crash happens. And wait a minute. Wait a minute. I've seen her before. Where have I seen her before? No, this is really distracting. This is really distracting me. Okay, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I have to look this up. She was Shaw? From Person of Interest? Huh, she is. Weird. Anyway, well, this movie opens up with Carter directing traffic, singing and dancing, as he is wont to do. And it's after that that we actually get the assassination attempt on Ambassador Han. This is a direct reverse of what's normally done in the movies. In Rush Hour 1, the movie opens up with Lee and his strike team's raid on Juntao's operations. And then it goes to Carter, doing Carter things. Rush Hour 2 opens up with the bombing of the U.S. Embassy, and then it cuts to Lee and Carter singing. But then this one starts off with comedy and then moves into the plot. I mean, in some ways this does make sense. I don't expect them to have Ambassador Han be shot and then cut to Carter singing. That really would feel out of place, especially since there's a chase scene involving Kenji right after that. And then they go on the plot, and there's really no way to do comedy right after that. So in some ways I understand it, and it's not like it really bothers me, and I'm kind of glad they're mixing something up, since it does do a lot of standard Rush Hour stuff. The real problem with the comedy, though, is that sometimes it feels like it's trying too hard. Now, don't get me wrong, the movie's still pretty funny, and it has a number of good jokes, and hell, I was actually outright laughing on some of them. But some of them just feel like they just don't stick. We actually get the captain from the first movie returning. I know, I was kind of shocked too. I mean, outside of Ambassador Han, this is the first time we actually had any Rush Hour characters return from a previous movie. He's in there for one short scene where he basically comes in, he gives us the lowdown on Ambassador Han, and then he basically repeats a gag from Rush Hour 1 with Carter. And this is one of the few times in the movie that it outright tries to copy itself. That joke in Rush Hour 1 where the Chief complains to Carter about the crap he's done, and then Carter counters it by going, no, that's okay. That was kind of funny. I mean, it was okay. I wouldn't consider it my favorite joke. But to come back and repeat it in Rush Hour 3, that kind of feels like the only reason they brought the captain back in. Just to repeat that with Carter, and that just wasn't funny, and honestly, it didn't even feel humorous. It just felt like, hey, look, this is something from the first movie. And it didn't even feel like a nice callback. It just felt like, hey, let's do it, but differently. Honestly, Carter's retorts weren't even all that funny either, because in the first movie, they were at least completely ridiculous. He's like, you destroyed evidence. We still got a little bit left. You blew up a city block. That block was already messed up. Stuff like that. But this one just didn't feel all that great. But, despite these failings, this movie has my favorite running gag in the entire series. George the taxi driver. Good gosh, George. He's actually a hilarious character. For being a side character, he has a full character arc. That's more than I can say for some of the main characters. I mean, when we first see him, he's this massive xenophobic, anti-American douchebag. He's just stereotypical French. I hate the Americans. All you all are violent monsters, starting wars and all that stuff. And then, and when he insults Halle Berry, Carter considers that crossing the line, puts a gun to his head, and demands him to sing the United States national anthem and declare he loves America. And after getting involved in some chase scenes, George actually decides that he loves this stuff. He wants to get in on the action. And throughout the movie, he gets progressively more pro-American. At one point, he even talks about, he's like drinking basically Starbucks and like drinking American coffee. He's like, I'll drink all this. I just want to be American. At one point, he tries to convince his wife that he's an American spy. And what's funny is that he's the guy who ends up killing Renard at the end of the movie. It's so funny because what's great is that his scenes build up every single time. Every time he comes in, he's like, oh, hey, it's like, I was looking for you. I want to drive you guys. And then he's like, I want to be American. I want to kill a man. And it's funny and it's hilarious. And he's easily one of the funniest characters in the movie. Just because he's so ridiculous. Though there's one scene that I just don't understand. It's the scene where Carter and Lee are both looking for Genevieve, and Carter is trying to track her down, and he ends up stumbling into the women's dressing room. Now, in order for them not to just kick him out, he pretends to be a famous fashion designer named Bubbles. And, he basically is like, where's Genevieve? And, like, she's in her own, she's in her own dressing room or something like that. And, okay. And then the girls want to know, what he thinks of their dresses, or what do they think of their outfits. And then the scene just goes on. Carter tries to play it cool, and he ends up going, no, you look awful. And he has them basically take them off so he can inspect them to make new outfits. And, this is something I would expect Carter to do. He's a well-established pervert. This was established in the previous movies.
All right, one other thing.
Yeah?
What color panties you got on? I'll take that one right there. She got the count.
Oh, yes. She's very nice.
She is nice, but I hurt my back and my neck, and I need a little bit more massage, so I'm gonna take her in the pink, too.
This is in character for Carter. I would expect him to do something like this. And there's been some fan service in the previous movies, mostly Rush Hour 2, but what I don't get is that this doesn't feel like it fits in. In fact, a lot of it would do better cut. One of the issues with this scene is that it just goes on, and it actually shows Carter with them having taken, their outfits off for the most part. They're still wearing something. Because full nudity would probably get this kicked up to an R rating. But the scene goes on, and I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, because it's really not. And it just drags on. This would actually have been so much better if you cut everything after him leaving to go to find Genevieve. He's like, where's Genevieve? He's like, I'm Bubbles. I'm looking for Genevieve. And he's like, she's in her own dressing room. Okay, goodbye. And then he leaves. And that's it. And then he cuts to Lee. And then Lee and Carter meet up. Alright, that works. But this goes on. And this goes on. And, I don't understand it. There's so much space here that's just kind of wasted. What's the joke? I was thinking, I watched this scene multiple times. I'm like, is this supposed to be building up to a joke? If later on one of the girls found Carter and slapped him like those women do in to Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies are, how dare you trick me? You are not the designer, or something like that. That would actually make sense. That would basically be the punchline for the setup. But there's nothing like that. And I don't understand it. You could cut this all and you would lose nothing. Honestly, if we had to worry about time, you could actually cut all that out and put in some of those deleted scenes, and you'd still have a similar runtime. You could cut out a couple minutes of that and then put in the scenes involving Carter and Lee talking about Kenji, and then the ending scene. And the movie would be vastly improved for it. And it's one of those baffling decisions I just don't understand. But if I had to put a reasoning to it, I guess it would just be fan service. But there's no comedy to it. That's what really baffles me. In Rush Hour 2, when we saw all those women, that Carter was picking to give him a massage, it was funny just because of how, Carter was reacting to everything. And he's just like, oh, is she good? Is she good with hands? And then Lee's like, hurry up. And he's like, man, wait. It's funny. It was comic relief. But this just, honestly, it feels like it's just here for fan service. And if they're going to do fan service, at least work it in with some comedy. Overall, though, the comedy it's pretty funny. But it sometimes tries a little too hard. And that's really the fault of the movie. If I had to actually say it, I think the show handles its humor better because it styles itself more after Rush Hour 2 when it balances the humor and the actual plot. It prioritizes comedy more often than the Rush Hour 2. And then it falls flat sometimes. And that's that really just kind of weakens parts of the movie. It doesn't make the movie bad by any stretch, and it doesn't even make it unfunny. It still gets plenty of laughs, but it's trying more often and failing more often. You know, that's basically the gist of it. Overall, it's still a funny movie, and I still laugh at this. So, but it's just kind of a little disappointing that the movie does try so hard to do a lot of comedy and then falls flat sometimes. Now, the action of the movie is, disappointingly, it's kind of lacking. Some of the action scenes just don't feel all that interesting. I mean, one of the first action scene in the movie is a chase scene with, Lee and Kenji, and it kind of reminds me a bit of some of the chase scenes in the show, and just they kind of feel it's Lee runs and jumps over stuff. That can be summed up as what happens in this. And it's not interesting really to watch. In fact, the only real interesting part of that is at the end when Carter, tries to run over Kenji and then hits a dumpster and Lee, runs up a wall to avoid getting crushed. But overall, I kind of feel like it's lacking. Some of the other fights just don't feel as interesting as the previous ones. Now, granted, Rush Hour 2 set the bar pretty darn high. There were 3 big fight scenes at the end that were really enjoyable. Especially the 2 that are by far my favorite fights in the entire franchise. This bamboo scaffolding fight and the massage parlor fight. But, Rush Hour 3 does have a few good fight scenes. One is the Dragon Lady versus Lee, and this one actually is good because it mixes, action with some comedy, because the comedy really comes from Carter sitting outside, listening to it, thinking that they're having sex, and then it turns out, no, she's trying to kill him, and all these grunts he's hearing are them, hitting each other and smashing into stuff and running into and getting hit into the walls and stuff. And that fight is pretty enjoyable, even though it can get pretty ridiculous. One of the biggest problems with some of the fights is some of them just feel a little gimmicky. The one that feels the most gimmicky is easily the dojo fight. And, oh gosh dang it, this fight. Basically, it's Carter and Lee versus a guy who's 7 feet tall. And it doesn't really feel like there's much thought put into it besides that. I mean, there's some gags, but this fight doesn't feel all that interesting. I mean, it's just them fighting a guy who's big, and that's it. That's the punchline. He's huge. And it's not all that interesting. I've seen plenty of, martial arts movies that have fights in dojos, and it's usually one guy versus, a whole dojo of students. And if it was something similar to that, Lee and Carter fighting a number of, students, that would actually make sense, except all the students in there were kids. But if you had some of the instructors or something come and tried to stop them from going to Soo Young's locker, alright, that would have been more interesting. But this just... But the last fight in the entire movie, Kenji versus Lee, is by far the best. I actually put it top 5 in the franchise. Top 5 in the trilogy. I really do. It's just that good. And it really is. It feels like this is the fight that they really wanted to do. Out of all the fights in the movie, this is the one they put the most effort in. You've got plot. You've got character interactions between Kenji and Lee. You've got Carter making funny jokes while the fight is going on. And it's so interesting. You have a lot of good action, a lot of good stunts, and it's taking place on the Eiffel Tower, on the scaffolding of the Eiffel Tower, hanging on a net on the Eiffel Tower. It's or one of those suspending things that keep people from hitting the ground if they fall. It's just so interesting. I've said that I really like martial arts fights, but I am a massive sucker for a good sword fight, and this just outright delivers. And also, we get some really good interactions between Lee and Kenji, but I'll get to that in a little bit. And the whole fight is just so enjoyable. It's almost kind of funny. just how completely enjoyable this fight is. Another good part of this fight is the fact that Carter finally gets to do some awesome action. Throughout the movies, you see Carter get progressively better at fighting. I mean, in Rush Hour 1, he could fight, but he needed some help from Lee. In Rush Hour 2, he definitely managed to hold his own, even fighting off numerous guys, even if he still needed help from Lee. In Rush Hour 3, he takes on 4 of Kenji's guys by himself and wins, and then celebrates in a very Carter fashion.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. That man was fast as light. Soo-young!
But honestly, it's actually nice to see Carter do that. It's great to see him actually fight off those guys without getting any help from Lee. That is definitely a plus in this movie's favor. So, while there are a couple things that are kind of similar to the show, overall, the action is better than the show, and it does make it more of an attempt than the show does to do bigger fight scenes, and I have to give it credit for that. 2 of the fight scenes in this movie are pretty darn good. One of them is one of the best in the trilogy. So, while the movie does lack a little in the action, it still makes up for it with with a couple good fight scenes and one really, really good fight. Now with the characters, I did mention before, this is the first time we actually got returning characters. I mentioned the captain and what he did, but I also need to talk about Soo-young. Soo-young comes back, and she's older. She's late teens, early 20s. The time frame is kind of, iffy on, how long it's been. But we see Soo-young is older, and it's kind of funny since Carter is just like, I haven't seen her since she was 10 years old. And then he sees her, and he's like, she's an attractive young woman. He's like, you were a really cute little girl last time I met you, and now and you can see this confusion on his face, and he's like, no, you were a cute little girl. It's funny, he actually suggests buying her a teddy bear, and he sees adult Soo-young come in, and he's just like, wait, what? Soo-young actually does get in on the action, and it's actually kind of nice to see. Thankfully, they don't shove her in. She's involved in one fight scene and is part of the movie at the end. Now, we saw in Rush Hour 1 where she did her best to hold her own, and she actually did manage to almost escape from the triads. I mean, but, she's a 10-year-old girl going up against an organized triad, so chances of getting away are pretty slim. But it's great seeing her, older, and the fact that she teaches martial arts. She actually got a little bit into the fight, and it was one of the best moments in one of the fight scenes was a shootout in the hospital to defend Ambassador Han from being assassinated. Which, on a side note, is actually one of the few actual straight-up firefights we actually see in the series. The only other one I can really think of is the ending of Rush Hour 1. I don't think they had actual gunfights in Rush Hour 2. But anyway, one of my favorite parts of that fight is Soo-young and Lee actually working together for a little bit, and it's actually just nice because we know that Lee taught Soo-young how to fight, and it's great to see them work together like that. And what's kind of funny is that Soo-young's actually the one who lands the killing blow on the Dragon Lady, who Lee fought earlier in the movie. I think she's actually just listed as that in the credits. And it leads to one of the most gruesome deaths in the series. Congratulations, Soo-young! Thankfully, that one was just off screen, so we didn't actually see any of it. What I'm really glad, though, with Soo-young is that they didn't shove her in. They could have easily put her in there as the kid sidekick, and that would have just been awful. It would have been forcing her to be like a short round character.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold your potato.
And honestly, I'm really glad because her character was used in the best way. She wasn't overbearing, she was still likable, and she managed to get a little in the action without, basically going girl power, which I'm glad. I'm glad that, I'm glad they didn't overdo it with Soo-young because her role in the movie was great. Now, one of the most interesting things is the dynamic between Lee and Kenji, and I said I'd talk about this. I'm going to talk about this right now. There's always this dynamic between Lee and Kenji, and I kind of got this whole yin-yang thing with them. Now, I did look it up, and it's kind of funny. You know, Lee is kind of like yin, and, you know, Kenji is sort of like yang. Yin representing black or in passiveness and stuff like that, and then you have yang, which is, you know, like light, and then you have him like more aggressiveness, and that actually, and those bits actually do highly describe them. Funnily enough, whenever, you know, they get dressed up, Lee always wears dark colors, especially black. And in Rush Hour 3, whenever we see Kenji dressed up, he's dressed in white. Now, I don't know much about yin yang, but that did seem, I thought that was really interesting. Especially when you consider Lee's, you know, more passive nature against Kenji's aggressiveness, because Lee is very passive. Another thing about them is, well, you know, every single Asian villain has challenged Lee to shoot him. Sang did it. Ricky Tan did it. And Kenji does it. But Kenji does it the best. He really knows Lee better than those other guys did. And honestly, he pulls off some of the best ones. He does it multiple times in the movie. But at the end, when Lee has a katana in his throat, and he's just walking towards him saying, yeah, you gonna kill me? And oh gosh. It's really great. Lee versus Kenji is so great, specifically because Kenji is a match for him. Like Ricky Tan, he does have a personal connection to Lee. But unlike Ricky Tan, Kenji can match Lee on a physical level. That's one thing that makes the fight so good. There's an emotional level to it, and on top of there being an actual good fight going on. Kenji is a lot like Lee's opposite, but being able to match him does make him one of the more interesting villains because unlike Ricky Tan, he's physically capable. And unlike that one crazy Chinese lady, he actually has a connection to him. And you fuse all those elements into Kenji, and you get a very, very interesting character. Especially reading his arrogance in knowing Lee, and it's kind of scary because he really does know Lee. One thing I actually really like, though, is that, and this is something I know that they did. I don't know if they meant for the whole yin-yang thing, or if that just happened to happen. But I do know that they definitely were playing with their nationalities and the swords. In the final fight, Kenji actually uses the Chinese sword, and Lee actually uses the Japanese sword. And I thought that was kind of interesting because Kenji is Japanese and Lee is Chinese. And it is also cool to see them just, you know, use the swords. I actually did think about this. I mentioned in my last video in the notes that Kim is basically like a lot like Isabella in terms of she's a double agent. She also kind of has a little bit of, you know, Soo-young for that sort of like familial, you know, caretaker kind of feeling towards with Lee. But I also did notice rewatching the movies, Lee's sister also has a bit of Kenji to her too. It's funny. Lee's sister in the show is kind of a fusion of Kenji and Isabella with a little bit of Soo-young. Because especially when we see her fight Lee, she does have that sort of antagonistic feeling towards her. But you find out that that's basically all a ruse to keep up appearances, and she's actually a double agent. And what's also great is that, you know, you see the way Lee treats Kenji in the movie, and then you see the way Lee treats, you know, Kim, his sister. And, you know, you see this, you know, wanting to help them. And I thought that was actually kind of interesting. Another thing interesting with Kenji is, one thing that makes him so interesting is he actually has some more complex motives. And it's actually kind of hard to decipher his true, real motivations. You know, does he really hate Lee? Is he really just trying to kill him? Or, you know, is he trying to just drag Lee down to his level? Who knows? But one thing that I found was really interesting, this is actually what makes Kenji's death sad. I actually felt like Kenji's death was a little bit tragic. In the end of the movie, when Lee is holding onto the net and Kenji's underneath him, he's basically just saying, come on, kick me down. He's expecting Lee to do it. He's trying to push Lee to do it. He's been constantly, like, trying to kill him throughout the movie. He's literally threw him off the Eiffel Tower. And he's been trying to kill him with the sword for this whole fight. And then... But Lee still doesn't give up on him. He tries to save him. And then Kenji takes his hand. And when it becomes clear that Lee isn't going to be able to hold them up for very long, Kenji sacrifices himself. He straight up says, you know, there's no way you could hold us both up. And then Lee's just like, no, stop, don't do it. And then he basically pulls his hand off and falls to his death to save Lee. And it's like... And it's so ironic that he'd been trying to kill Lee this whole time. And the only time he actually does anything that's remotely selfless to save Lee is right before his death. I mean, that made him... Like, when I was rewatching this movie the first time, I saw that, I'm just like, whoa. Like, that's the first time I ever felt sad for a villain death in Rush Hour. Because most of them are just raging douchebags. But Kenji actually had a little bit of depth to him. And it's kind of sad. And really, that just makes him so much more interesting than the other villains. And that's one of the reasons why I like him so much. You know, I actually really feel for him. On a final point, talking about Lee and Carter in Rush Hour 3 compared to the show, Lee and Carter in the show are very different from they are in how their counterparts are in Rush Hour 3. Specifically because the show, they're new. They're like in Rush Hour 1. They've known each other for a little while, and they work together. In Rush Hour 3, they've known each other for years, so they've gone through a lot of crap together, and they've grown as people. And in the show, they're young. You know, like they are in Rush Hour 1. You know, they're younger. And it's really kind of unfair to compare characters at the end of a trilogy versus characters at the beginning of a show, but I do think it's important to mention, simply because they're very different characters at this. Lee and Carter in the show are very more similar to they are in their movie counterparts in Rush Hour 1. When you have Lee and Carter going through a whole trilogy of movies, you're going to need at least several seasons to get up to that point, if not a bunch of seasons. Overall, Rush Hour 3 is not as good as Rush Hour 2. It really isn't. Rush Hour 2 still stands as the best movie in the trilogy. But that doesn't mean that Rush Hour 3 is a bad movie. While it does get bogged down in a few parts, it does get bogged down in some of the humor. Some of the plot just feels like it has some filler in it, and it doesn't explain some things well because those explanations are in deleted scenes. The movie's still good. It's still enjoyable. I still like it, and I still think it's a fine movie in the Rush Hour trilogy. It's just not as good. And it's faint praise, but it's like, I want to say that, but I want to say that in a good way, but it comes off sounding bad. When Rush Hour 2 sets the bar way up here, and then Rush Hour 3 is like here, it feels like it's stepped down, and it is. But that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. Now, it does have a few faults, which I kind of think are to blame for it taking 6 years to make the movie. But other than that, the movie is pretty solid. Now, the next video for Rush Hour that I will do will finally be getting to the review for episode 9 of the TV show. I am super excited to get back to reviewing that, and I'll get that up as soon as I can. Thank you for watching.